Hey, Matt from Hidden Machine here today with another developer interview. We've been doing a series of interviews with people who work in and around the games industry. Today, our interview is with a developer named Mo Eldawy, who is the person behind a game called Swivel, a VR game that focuses on the swivel chair, which I'm in one right now. Maybe you are too. If not, feel free to hop in one. It might make the interview a little more, a little more engaging for you. You can do one of these as you're listening. And we talk about VR gaming from a lot of different angles. You know, he's giving us a perspective on what it's like for him to develop and try to market and put out this VR game. And there's a lot of nuance with VR. I find that there's, not much VR coverage in a lot of the channels that I follow on YouTube or a lot of the just different gaming outlets that I, follow online in general. We talk for quite a while about, where things are at in VR, where they might go, things we'd like to see, and also, his experiences as a developer. I met Mo through Barry Leach, who I interviewed for the channel a little while back. Barry's been making music for quite a long time, since the mid 80s up through today. One of his most recent projects is the aforementioned Swivel. He did all the music for that game and put me in touch with Mo, and I think it's a pretty interesting talk, so get ready to check it out. But first, before going further, I do want to say thank you to all of our supporters here on the channel and on Patreon. It's really helpful. Honestly, you mean the world to us. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy this talk between myself and Mr. Mo Eldawy. We're going to get into it right now. To start off, I'm curious, can you just tell me a little bit about your background in game development?
For sure. So I would say my background is more like technical. So I have like started my career as a software engineer. I have been working mostly in big companies. But at the same time, I actually had this like passion for building games for a while. So like I actually built my very first game maybe 20 years ago or 21 years ago. And back then it was like the world was completely different, of course. There was no VR, no Steam, nothing. Like you had to actually print CDs and send them to people. So back then, I started building that passion early. And like back then, I really liked the idea of building puzzle games. Like I was really into these like thinky puzzle games. So Swivel is honestly quite a big deviation from that. But since then, I have like over time built different concepts. Sometimes it would be a game that I would put out. A lot of the time I wouldn't be very happy with the result and I would just keep it for myself, and sort of that's where it went.
Okay. So is this the first time with Swivel that you've developed a game or published a game in VR?
Correct, yes. This is the very first one that we actually got to put out there in front of people.
So what drew you to working in VR? Like, were you, I guess, like, how long have you been using VR yourself? Like, what's your experience with VR and what draws you to it as a developer?
It's a very good question. So I was actually one of the very early backers of the very original Oculus. Like that was like a Kickstarter that I think was in 2012 or something like that. So I was actually, yeah, like I supported that Kickstarter. So I was there from the very, very early days. I did read Ready Player One, which like right before supporting that Kickstarter, which I really enjoyed, by the way. So I have been there for a while. I happened to be at Meta and I was leading one of the teams working on Horizon, which is like a really ambitious project that Meta is building towards like creating essentially a metaverse within Oculus. So I have seen that passion grow in like different directions. I got to learn more about what people really like what does a good experience look like, things like that. So I'm personally a big believer of like spatial computing. I do think VR is gonna either be the future or it will be the precursor to something even bigger that we get to see. Maybe augmented reality, but maybe something completely different that we can't even think of today that will be there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of leads into what I'm curious about with this is I play a lot of VR games and I find that they're all kind of drastically different experiences. Like I feel like VR in terms of gaming specifically is still really finding its footing. And I personally found that stuff with briefer sessions, like something like Swivel, where it's more like a session game where I can come in, I can try level, I can I can compete against my own scores and feel it out and just kind of have a little experience, then be able to walk away from it. It's easier for me to play something like that than it is something that's like a longer campaign focused thing. And yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of where you see kind of the strengths and weaknesses in different types of VR games, because it also seems like it. And I'm curious about your experience, especially having more of a background in it. I find that every individual player has such a different physical, mental, emotional response to VR that seems hard to find stuff that could be successful because it's so much harder to connect with players through VR, I find. I don't know if that's been your experience.
It is. And by the way, this is a fascinating question. And I don't think the world even knows what the answer is. So like at best, we can just like put our own ideas. And I'm really curious also what do you think. But to me, this is exactly the kind of stuff I obsessed over for the past few years, where exactly as you said, like, is it better to have this like long session in VR, or would you rather just like jump in and out? And personally, I have found that like these kind of like shorter experiences where you are really engaged the whole time, to me, seem to play much better. Like maybe like a style that I would have loved to see succeed, but unfortunately, it just didn't play well with like maybe the exact opposite, which is the escape room type thing where like because of my love for puzzle games, that's what I always wanted to build. I wanted to build a complex escape room and you have to solve really hard puzzles. But then what happens is you are sitting in VR and you are stuck and you just don't know where to go. And that is just not as pleasant of an experience. I think one other thing to me is also like the social aspect of this. And sometimes the social aspect may be that you have a multiplayer game, but sometimes it's different. It's just you need characters in the world. Like some games out there, it's like you are completely alone in a world that is unique and amazing and everything, but it feels very, very lonely in there. And I have found that it's much better to have like a little bit of this social side of like things, a little like having more characters in the world, how big and small they are, how far away from you they are, or how close. Like all of these things really can enrich the experience. And you may have seen some of that in Swivel, for example, where like I didn't get to mention what Swivel is, but like I'd love to talk about that at some point. But in Swivel, once you end the level, you find yourself in the middle of a dance floor and you are surrounded by aliens dancing around you. And we intentionally got to pick certain things, like we wanted a certain percentage of those aliens to be really close to you and looking at you. And we wanted some of them to be farther away and just minding their own business. And the whole idea is to try to just capture this like maybe little moment of like social anxiety when you are dancing in front of others. And we wanted people to like become more comfortable with that in a controlled way, in a way. So it has been a fascinating, like I think these tiny decisions honestly make a big difference.
Yeah, I think more so than in a lot of other platforms. So yeah, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm showing some footage here as we talk, but can you explain, in your words, what Swivel is?
For sure, more than happy to. So yeah, I imagine people who haven't seen it would probably like it's sort of a new thing. So Swivel is a rhythm virtual reality game, and unlike most other like virtual reality rhythm games, like Swivel is a game that you actually play seated down. And we do recommend that players like play it seated in a swivel chair. And why a swivel chair? Like I mean, hence the name, by the way. Like why a swivel chair? It's because like being in a swivel chair allows you to like turn around like this, right? Like I think you are even doing it a little bit right now.
I am.
Like you
I
can,
am.
yeah, it's a motion that all of us love. Like we just do it subconsciously, and swivel essentially pushes that mechanic and elevates it into like a full game. So in the game, you are on this track and the music is playing. And as the music is playing, you're going to start slowly like swiveling your chair. Originally, it's going to be like a quarter turn, which is like fairly easy to do. But then slowly it gets more and more interesting because at some point we are going to introduce half a turn, which like You can go, like, I can show you very quickly what that would look like, but then I need to mind my surroundings. But it would look something like this, right? Like you would go half a circle, and then in the game, you can stay facing this way for a while. And then we take that to a full spin. But we didn't even stop there, did we? It can get more and more and more intense if you go to the upper level. So at some point, for example, you may do one full spin this way, and then as soon as you finish it, you just do like the opposite spin in the other direction. So for people who choose to go to the upper difficulty levels, it can get pretty intense, but it's tons of fun. So at the same time, like, because you are controlling the movement with your feet, you're like, also your hands start playing a role in the game. So along the way on the track, you start meeting these characters. So like the first characters you meet are these like excited alien characters that want to high-five you on the way. So in the game, you would just like basically with your hands, like high-five them like this. So we kind of now introduce this motion. You can do it up top, you can do it on the side, you can do it down low, etc. And then with time, we start adding more and more moves. Like, for example, these like drum-like characters, like they pop up, try to scare you. You are supposed to hit them on the head. So like you have this motion, you have this motion. Slowly, we start adding more and more motions. Like, for example, there are motions that require both your hands to move at the same time, something like this. Sometimes it's like you need to move your hand in a certain pattern or stuff like that. So it does get fascinating, actually.
So I played through all the levels of the game, and I did notice the increasing intensity, but I never went away feeling, I thought I would feel dizzy, and I really didn't, which I was impressed by, because I don't know if that was something to do with the way I was anchored in VR. I didn't feel it in the same way, but I was very surprised by that.
Yeah, that's an amazing observation, by the way. And it's intentional. Like the reason you don't get as dizzy is because you're also moving your body to match what's going on in the game. Like to me, what's dizzying is if you like move a thumbstick like this and the world just shifts around you, but you're
Right.
not moving in real life. But in Swivel, like you actually are, like the track is turning and you are physically turning with it. So there is no like discontinuity going on at all. And
Yeah.
I have to say, there is some math into like how fast you are turning and like how exactly the curvature of the track is and stuff like this, which is meant to sort of like try to make it as comfortable as possible. Like you don't feel any jitteriness or any like discontinuity as you're playing the game.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on that, because I appreciated the game because I liked the full body experience, but having it combined with sitting down in the swivel chair, like it is a novel idea. It was a lot of fun, and I do find sometimes when I'm playing VR games where even if I'm standing, if I'm playing like an action game, um, some I can turn my body fully, but other times I get very disoriented, and I don't know, not having like a real anchor point sometimes can be very, very confusing. But then there's games like, I'd say like Super Hot is one of the most physical games I've played. And I always feel like I have a good grip on where things are, because I kind of get recentered at the end of a stage.
Mm,
But you know, it's just so funny, like game to game, like what the physical sensation is, and how, you know, if will it be disorienting, will it not, can you feel grounded, can you feel physically fully immersed, and you can't sometimes. And I don't know, it's so fascinating to me to see like these nuanced approaches to different types of movement, uh
yes.
giving wildly different results. And I found that with Swivel, I was able to keep up most of it. There was a couple spots where the turning was almost, I just couldn't keep up on the speed, but it was like a fun challenge still. You know,
Yes.
I didn't expect it to to challenge me that much.
Interesting. And out of curiosity, like what were your favorite levels or maybe most memorable ones?
I can't remember what the track is called, but it's the song is about a record spinning. It's about listening to old
Yes.
records, and That's probably my favorite track.
Ah, nice. It's actually my favorite as well. So that's amazing. Which is like might be a good opportunity to talk about the music. Like Spin was, by the way, the very last song that we made for the game. And what's like the music in Swivel is an integral part of the experience. And in our case, the music is done by none other than Barry Leach himself. And Barry Leach, for those who don't know, is like really well-known video game composer, and he has been like innovating in music like since the Commodore 64 days and all the way recently with things like Horizon Chase Turbo, Life by You, etc. So like I consider working with Barry Leach to have been like one of the most amazing experiences, and I don't think the game would have been the same without him. So in this particular game, like Barry not only did the like the music for the game, but he also wrote the lyrics, and then get this, he even executed the actual singing with AI. So he was able to create full songs and just have them part of the game. And the beauty of having him like do all of this from scratch is he was able to write the songs in a way that actually matched the motion in the game too. So like I think early on there is this fly song, and then like the lyrics are written in a way so that like when it says fly, the player is also doing like a flying motion.
Mm-hmm.
Spin, as you saw, is like an interesting one. It's a song about nostalgia, and like you remember the record spinning, but then in the game you are also spinning on a record, and then it sort of takes you back in time. So it's like it has been fascinating working with him. Like Barry honestly is a genius. Like he has this uncanny ability of creating like super memorable pieces of music. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
kind of music you hear in a video game, and then like days later you're walking down the street and like you start humming it to yourself. So it has been fascinating, and I believe this is the first game that he's building like actual songs for. Like this was completely his idea. Um, but the amazing thing about these AI voices is like you can make them flawless, right? Like you can just say, I want this AI voice to hit like this particular pitch, and they are going to hit it perfectly. It's going to be exactly how you want it to be. And even more interesting, you can just like make it go as long as you want. Like you want 40 full notes of middle C, and like the AI voice is going to hit that, exactly that, and it will never waver the whole time because they don't even need to breathe. It's fascinating.
I remember when I spoke to Barry about, we were talking about music in general, and when this game came up, this project, I was getting ready to ask him about working with the vocalist and if he wrote the melodies and you know if the vocalist had some input. And before I even got to ask, he goes, "Oh, and then the voices are all synthesized." And I've used different. I have a background in music production as well, and I've used different software over the years, but it hasn't come together very well in years past. This was the first time I heard something where I was completely had no idea that it wasn't a human voice, and I think that's really cool for someone who is working by themselves and is is a composer to be able to add this new element in a way that it really works for video games, especially. I think it's the kind of thing I think is very video game music has used vocal sampling for 30, 40 years. There's been all sorts of vocal samples in video game music, but to be able to expand on that in this kind of way, I think is really cool.
Agreed. It looks like technology has gone a really long way. Like it is impossible for me to listen to some of these songs and believe that this is not a real human. And I find it hilarious, by the way, that like in a song like Sweet Tooth, which is level 3 in the game, like you have this like woman singing, and she has this like femme fatale kind of voice, and she's singing about a heartbreak, and you listen to this song and you feel for her and you say, okay, I want to look, who is that singer? And then you look up the song and it's just Barry Leach. Like that's all you get. And it's because AI cannot hold copyrights. Like for now, it just has to be only Barry, which is like a fascinating topic in itself. I don't know. What do you think? Like, do you think AI should be able to hold copyrights?
In this situation, to me, it's the same as using any other instrument to me.
Mm.
And there's obviously the AI has a degree of, I don't know if autonomy is the right word, but it is it is making choices in a way. It is doing something, but also the end user is doing so much that I've used analog synthesizers as well that have sometimes a degree of unpredictability, and I've used lots of other instruments. Even acoustic instruments will have little quirks that are beyond your control that give it the character. So I don't know. I mean, I think I think we're too early in for me to really say how I feel, because I also feel we're really on this sort of precipice where it's impossible to now not know about AI. Whereas I think for many years it was something that the average person had no working knowledge of, and now so many average people who are not tech people at all are experimenting with AI in different ways. It's going to open the culture up in to something that we've never really had to confront before.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. And yeah, I don't think we know what's going to happen. It's fascinating. Although, at least in my view, I would love a world where at least some of these AIs get to have names and like imagine if some like in the future, let's say we have more music packs and some of it is going to have exactly that same lady singing again. Like, I mean, again, today she has no name, but maybe she starts developing a fan base for herself. And it would be interesting. How do people find her? Like she starts becoming an identity of her own. Although personally, I don't think it should go as far as like the copyrights belonging to her. I think probably we need to separate those where you just have them, like you start giving them names so people can find them, but legally I can imagine it still goes into the human that built it.
Right. And even that's similar to when I hear a recording. Sometimes I want to know, oh, what was that equipment? What was that sound? How did you achieve that? I
Mm,
want to know, what tools were used.
mm.
And so, I mean, it would be nice if, specific AI voices were being utilized to know, well, what is that? Not to leave so much mystery.
Exactly. Totally agree.
Yeah. So, was there any sort of discussion on the tempos of the songs? Like, did you have to keep it within a certain range for the movement? Because that's what I found really fascinating as I was playing, was how just the way that things moved along at a certain speed. I imagine you must have done a lot of tweaking to find like what was optimal for that whole thing to be harmonious.
Yes, and tons of stories there that like we can go all over the place, but it's fascinating. You are right, but the final choice that we shipped with in the game was not the initial choice. Like I think originally in the game we explored the wide gamut of like different tempos and like different also instruments and things like that. So it's worth saying that like originally when I like had the idea for Swivel, I was trying with like some well-known songs and I started building an appreciation for what kind of tempo works well. Slowly I wanted to keep challenging and putting like faster and faster and faster songs because that's what I liked. A turning point in the game was honestly like Barry playing the game for the first time. Like watching Barry play was fascinating. So we actually got to meet in the Bay Area, like near San Francisco. So Barry and Karen, his wife, like they got to play the game. They were the very first people to get to experience it, at least like in front of me directly like this. By the
Mm-hmm.
way, they are an amazing couple, like Barry and Karen. Like they have this like amazing sense of humor. It's like the kind of couples that finish each other's sentences, except that in the case of Barry and Karen, they always finish it in like the most negative way possible, which honestly I find hilarious, but it's also adorable at the same time. Like they are an amazing couple. I really love them. So anyway, like they visited my place and they wanted to play the game for the first time. And back then, the only level in the game was Love Me and Leave Me, which is today level 2 in the game. And most of the graphics was not even there yet. But even worse, the level was like twice as hard as the one that shipped in the game. And I remember Barry played the game and to his credit, he managed to finish the level. But then as soon as he took off the headset, he said like, "Mo, this is really hard. This is like very, very intense." And honestly, in my mind, I'm like, "What are you talking about, Barry? This is like so simple." But anyway, if as if we needed more proof, like Karen put on the headset, and within like 4 seconds, she was like flying halfway across the room. She hit the wall. Like she couldn't, she was so disoriented. She didn't know what was going on. And then I realized, like, this was a wake up moment for me. I realized that, Matt, I have been swiveling in chairs nonstop for months as I was building this game. I am testing all possible ideas. I'm pretty sure I hold a world record or two related to swivel chairs. Maybe like fastest spin or like longest number of spins in a swivel chair. So unknown to me, I had become the expert. And so as I was building levels, I would build something where I say, "Oh, this is like very normal." But then like other people would play and they're like, "That is unbelievably intense to us." So I had to like go back and lower the difficulty of everything. In some cases, I had to change even the tempo of the, like how fast the level runs. But interestingly enough, I still have all these like super intense levels saved here. Like luckily, I had to play all of them, so none of you have to. But every now and then, I like to pop one in and just try and see like how intense it can get.
Oh, that sounds fun. Yeah, maybe it could be added sometime as an optional challenge mode.
I guess so. If there is ever enough demand for this, I'm more than happy to release these.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so one thing I really liked in the game, which is funny because it's kind of it's almost one of the least intense parts, but there are parts where you're kind of doing these, as if you're composing the music or conducting the music, waving your arms down, you're catching these like lines of music notes and symbols that are on the sides of the screen. It's such a passive action, and it's not really not rhythm based as much as it is. I think it is rhythm based, but it's not the same hit the note on the beat kind of thing that you're used to in rhythm games. That sort of gliding motion, I don't know why. I found that super satisfying, even though it was, also the rhythm stuff is satisfying. And I play drums and I love rhythm games. I'm always, curious to see how different people attack it. But I found the more passive stuff to be super engaging as much as the more active stuff. I think there's a good balance of those two elements in the game.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. And that was, by the way, intentional too. Like actually all the levels in Swivel had to be like rebuilt a few times as we kept updating like our understanding. What is fun to do in a swivel chair, right? So the very original version of all the levels, it tended to be more similar to what you're describing, like you're hitting the beat, but there were very few of these, like say flying motion or like turning around like this and things like that. And I think it was fun. I mean, there are entire games like today shipped with just this mechanic, but we felt we can do better. And so we started trying to have like a different personality to every level, and like having part of the personality needed you to have like these sections where it's more like about hitting the beat, you're kind of timing it right, but then other parts of the same level should be more like this hand wavy movements, and some levels they just lean one way or another. Like also how you manage these like turns with hand movements, like each level has its own character in there. Some levels like they will tend to be more swivel heavy, you are turning around a lot, but sometimes it's like much more about like the hand movements like in Winter. And yeah, like I think you're probably referring to Winter, like when you mentioned like all these hand movements, and that was exactly what we were trying to replicate for that level. It's like that joy of like when you listen to a really cool piece of classical music and you find yourself like moving your hands like in a dreamy fashion. And by the way, we got to even watch some people do that to use as inspiration for the kind of moves that we wanted to put in there.
That's cool. That's really cool. I noticed the game has like I can't remember what it's called, like a gentle mode.
Correct.
I was curious, like how was that in mind from the start for development, and how do you kind of tweak and balance those different modes? I've noticed different VR games have different modes for maybe people who are more sensitive to motion sickness, or so yeah. I'm just curious if you can speak on that topic at all.
I would say it wasn't like very originally. That was not the intent. Like the intent was to ship with the eight like higher difficulty levels. But as I was talking, like when Barry saw the game and he's like, this is really, really intense. And then we started play testing the game with also like different age ranges, different like background in playing games. We started to see clearly some people wouldn't have been able to handle like the harder levels. And
Hmm.
so that's when we decided, okay, it makes a lot more sense to have like a gentler mode. And the main difference there is that there's just less swiveling around. Like you don't go like in circles, or you don't do super sharp turns, or things like that, or at the very least you do less of them. um, it looks like a lot of people prefer the gentler experience. Like in fact, even the
Hmm.
next release of the game, we are going to make that become the default as people get used to it. And then once they are used to it, then they can try like the swivel heavy mode, which is what we are going to call it, which I think is very satisfying, by the way, but you got to ease into it a little bit.
That makes sense. I could see if someone plays it, and they know there's a more intense mode, they have something to look forward to. But if they play it and it's too intense the first time, it's just going to sour them to the whole
Exactly.
experience. Huh. That's interesting. So are there updates planned for the game? Do you have like future, like where are you at with the project?
Absolutely. So we only launched a couple of weeks ago on App Lab, and like by the way, we do have like one level for free for like one track that people can try for themselves, and that's Fly, just to get a flavor of like what is going on in this game.
Hmm.
So early on, like we are so early, and it looks like people who found the game, they were quite happy with it, they loved it. Our challenge is really how to get the word out, how to get the world to know about Swivel. And we were really fortunate that we have Alex join us full time. He's like now joining as a full time partner, taking on things like marketing, branding, and things like that. So we are starting to see these like early successes. Like he's doing a commendable job. So like our very first priority right now is just to establish this bi-directional communication with our players. Just try to like listen to them and try to understand what did they like, what would they have loved to see more of, what would they have loved to see differently. So we have like a Discord now that like we are
Hmm.
hoping to like engage players with, and like again we are a small team, we are learning too. So the hope is to listen as much as we can, make sure that we are moving in a direction that players will find fun. Um, we do have ideas already for like what the next like set of swivel tracks would look like, and you can imagine, of course, new music, but not just new music. Like we also have new ideas for movements that you can engage. Like we can push that mechanic even further. There are ideas that we always wanted to try, but they proved to be too challenging in such an initial, like it would have been too much, I think, if we had
Hmm.
them in the initial levels. But people who love these levels and they want to get more, there's going to be like more movement mechanics that people can try, maybe new characters along the way, new level design, new stories for these levels. And of course, it's going to be Barry again, like working with us.
Great.
But yeah, we'll see. Like the specific composition of where we would go, honestly, has to come from what the players like tell us, right? And at the same time, we also have like longer term plans for like more games. Like the goal is to try to always be like really fresh and do something that like people have not seen before. And the hope is players get to like that.
That's cool. I was curious about marketing, because it seems like it's so difficult to sell a VR experience because VR was where I first noticed almost every game had a brief demo. And a lot of PC games now, more recently, have gotten back into demos. But it seems like demos were very absent from gaming for a while. I mean, demo discs maybe 25 years ago, but the last decade or so, there's been this sort of up and down thing. And I've noticed with VR, you kind of need to play it. You can't go off of a trailer or a review in the same way because you just it's that experience. So I imagine that the hurdle for you is getting people on the app more than anything, right?
Absolutely. Like, what can you do to tell people about what that VR experience is going to be like when they are not even in VR? Like, that is such a
Yeah.
challenging problem. And I don't think developers of different sizes, like not even just indie developers, but even big like studios, they also struggle with how to get the idea out. Like you can imagine, like you show a picture, but it doesn't show exactly, it doesn't convey the right message. Even trailers, they tend to be like fairly flat, and they again, like what you see is going to be very different when you are in the middle of it. Like imagine that experience of like maybe you are in VR and you're standing next to a giant or something. How do you convey that in an image or a trailer, or like that also like social thing where like you are surrounded by like people or aliens very close to you? It's very difficult to convey these kind of things. Honestly, we are still trying to figure that out. I don't think there is an easy answer. Having like one free track, I think, is very important, just so people can, at some point, if it intrigues them, they like there is a low barrier of entry where they can try it for themselves and see what it's like. But even getting to that is also challenging. And one thing we are experimenting with is sort of like trying to boil down the gameplay into like as simple as possible of a graphic. So something similar to this. That's not how the game looks like in VR, but it conveys the picture behind it like very
Mm-hmm.
efficiently, because showing a screenshot is not going to be the same as you would experience it in the game.
That's interesting. It's almost similar to the way, way back when a lot of Atari games would show a very, magnificent image to put your mind in a more simple image. And now it's funny with the VR, it almost does make sense to have a more simple image because you're going to put yourself in there and then you're going to be so immersed in a way that a still image can't communicate. It's like a weird, converse of
That is such an amazing observation. Yeah,
that's
that's right. It's sort of like we went the other way around.
yeah. I don't know. I'm so interested in VR gaming because I think it's so. I mean, I've tried various VR experiences from the mid '90s forward.
Mm.
Um, I remember one where I was skiing, and you were in a sort of like a pod. I don't know how to put it. You were on a small platform, a small enclosed platform, and you had your headset, and they would spray you with like the scent of
Ah,
trees, like a spruce tree scent, and then there'd be wind on you when you were going down the mountain, and it was it was a neat demo, but it was it was clearly that wasn't going to sell VR units. That was maybe
mm.
an amusement park type experience,
Int-
possibly, but nothing for the home user. The
mm.
Virtual Boy I also played it at launch quite a bit, and I saw the potential of VR gaming there, but it was so uncomfortable to use, and the red was very. It was some games could utilize it beautifully, and many others couldn't. And to see where VR gaming's been now, I've been a Quest user for maybe 5 or 6 years at most, and I just feel like I haven't seen VR gaming make a big leap yet. It's been very sort of lateral movement where I just keep seeing new ideas
Mm.
explored, and I just think there's so much more ground for people to explore, to pull in. What is a casual VR gamer? What's a hardcore gamer? What, how do you find these different markets, and what games even exist for those markets? They're not even, I don't think there's really even like a big template that people can look to right now. In terms of other games, you go, oh, we're doing a live service game. It's like maybe it's like Fortnite, it's Battle Royale. We're doing this. I see a lot of
Yeah.
companies start up. They're following a path, and VR
Mm.
seems like you're pioneering so much more because there's not as many big examples of sort of cornerstone titles to look to in VR. And there's a handful, but I struggle to think of more than maybe 10 at most. And even that's might be pushing it.
Yeah, it is so true. And I wonder why you think that is. Like, one possibility might be that just the hardware is improving so rapidly that essentially what becomes possible today is going to be completely irrelevant like a year from now. Like who knows? Things are shifting so fast. Like the Quest 3 was such a huge leap over Quest 2, which in itself was like a huge leap over the first Quest. Um, so it's unclear if like even the rules can be written already, but maybe also it goes back into how hard it is to experience like VR content easily. Like there is a longer cycle between like putting something in front of players and seeing them play the game. Like a play test is completely different when it's in
Mm.
VR. So it's interesting to know like is it really that the hardware keeps changing or is it that just trying to figure it out has been quite challenging or something else?
It's so hard to say too because it's one of the few platforms where I think graphical fidelity and the complexity of graphics don't really matter as much as the tactile experience. I play a lot of games that just have, it's just flat polygons, just flat shading, and there's no realism to it. It's very arcadey, it's very old school in a lot of ways, very simplified graphics, and those can be some of the most engaging games. And that's not always the case on something like PC or console. So I don't know. I feel like and it's also such a risky sort of like thing because there's such a barrier to entry for VR right now. So many users are not quite there yet, and so I just don't know if there's enough people working on it just yet. I see it growing. It's definitely coming up, but I just don't know. Yeah, I don't know when that watershed moment will be. If it's going to come for VR, or if things will change before VR can fully figure it out. Because right now, a lot of the AR stuff is very, very intriguing, and I could definitely see that maybe moving faster for certain types of application. I don't even know if it's all about gaming, because that's the other thing too, is gaming is a big part of it for me. But like for VR, so much of it is social, video, and it's a whole, social media, entertainment kind of combination. It's hard to nail down. I don't know. I think about it a lot because I would love to see more diversity in VR gaming, and I struggle to find good titles as well. Not because they aren't out there necessarily, but because it's just, I don't think there's even like a good diverse enough network of curators suggesting titles. I watch a lot of video game coverage. Very rarely do they discuss VR unless it's like a VR enthusiast. So it's,
Correct.
yeah, it's so, there's so much unprecedented stuff going on because it's such a nascent kind of industry, but at the same time, it's been around for so long. It's
I agree. I mean, it is such a fascinating position to be in. It feels to me that AR is not there yet. Like we are still a little bit far. Like we are seeing some great concepts and like these things are giving us a flavor of what to expect, but it
mhm.
doesn't feel to me like there is some real like AR solution today that people can use. So then we are left with this like do we push VR to the limits or do we wait for AR or is it going to be mixed reality? And I honestly don't know. Like to me, the hardest thing about VR is it's very different as a gaming like medium than a console, for example, where you can sit with a few other people on the couch and you play the game together. Like there is a social bonding thing. But when you put a VR headset, you become quite isolated. Like you're just completely on your own, and it like as of today, it like tends to block out the outside world. I have seen games that try to still do this like multiplayer party feel, but some people play the game from their phones and one
Mhm.
person is in VR, like things like that, which has been interesting for sure. I don't know like if that becomes the future or something else, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, I've played a bit where I'll have my my output so people can see what I'm seeing, but even then, it's not. it doesn't communicate totally, because I'll look back at the gameplay footage and it's like,
Yes.
it's just it's you're looking at this very loose approximation of the experience, but it's the depth of it, and so much of it is so physical that
No, that's so true.
yeah, I don't know how to open it up, and to make it more social. I don't know. I almost feel like you'd need multiple headsets, but at that point, it's a space issue, and if you have people together. But there's so much potential at the same time. A game like Swivel, it wouldn't be all that obstructive to have multiple people playing it at the same time, even competitively in some way. I think would be fascinating.
I agree. This, by the way, we are in early discussions for what like a multiplayer Swivel would look like. And our current thinking is to maybe try to go for a different formula than the competitive who can get the highest score, and instead try to aim to have like two people experience that level together. So you can imagine like as they play, maybe they high five each other, they can see like each other coming in a like a floating chair on the way. If they manage to high five each other correctly, they get like bonuses.
Oh, so they'd be on the same course but on different paths?
Exactly. So it's like multiple instances of the same path in space, but they tend to like run into each other from different directions. So we are exploring things like that, and we will see like of course it has to come down to, is it fun and does it give you that feeling of like connectedness with the other person?
Right. Oh, it's so fascinating. On another, related topic, are there any VR games that you would recommend people to check out? I'm always so curious what other people like in VR, because I talk to every person. It's so case by case with taste.
That is true, and I wish I could give you recommendations for like the hidden gems and stuff like this. But I would say for me, mostly, I have really enjoyed like other rhythm games, of course, but more than that, I have really liked these like puzzle type games. That's what I tend to play myself in real life. So I really like The Room, for example. Like I thought that was like a very nice, like very polished, and it's a very satisfying experience. I used to like also The Room on phones, but I thought the VR adaptation was really good. I liked I Expect You to Die, which is sort of along the same lines, but it also puts in this like extra time pressure because like if you don't figure it out quickly, something bad happens, and it puts you in all these unusual environments. I have really enjoyed that game. Recently, I liked like A Fisherman's Tale, which is yet another one of these puzzle games, but it has this like impossible recursive structure where like the game has a copy of itself at a smaller scale, and then you can keep recursively entering the same world. I don't know if I don't know if that makes any sense, or if you tried this.
I'm not familiar with that game. I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds fascinating.
It's a fascinating game. It's very satisfying because it's mind bending in such an unusual way.
That's cool. So I'm curious if you have any sort of speculation about, purely speculation, I know, but do you have a sense of any sort of trend for VR? Do you see like anything? Do you see more users coming in possibly? Do you see like, I know consoles are doing some VR stuff with the PS5 VR, but I think that's all wired. And this is almost a separate statement, but I feel like wireless VR is almost a deal breaker for me. I've played some wired, and I almost can't. I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm afraid I'm going to rip the wires out. I don't feel like I have a secure enough connection. It's always just a USB cable or something, and
true, it breaks the immersion for sure.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like where do you feel about the state of VR gaming, and possibly if you have any, even if it's just a wild guess, I'm just curious what your insights are about the state of things and possibly where it might go.
Yeah, keep in mind these are like really wild speculation.
Yeah.
Like they are not based on any data or anything. But it is obvious to me also, like I am 100% with you, the future of VR is wireless. I don't see a future where you are tethered to something, and like that feels like it really breaks the immersion, and people like, by the way, don't get me wrong, like PSVR 2 is amazing.
Hmm.
It's just that it feels to me like they have to start pushing in the direction of wireless, and then like that is gonna be very important. Um, my guess is behind that we are gonna start to get into like full body modeling, like your feet and your legs and like your torso and like maybe even eye tracking and facial expression tracking, which was in the Quest Pro, by the way. My feeling is that probably is gonna come next, and it
Mm.
will start enabling experiences that were just not even possible at all. Where like you can do like maybe dancing experiences also like with your feet and legs and everything, or like you can imagine a soccer simulation where you get to
Hmm.
kick the ball and it becomes like really really accurate. Like all of that is not possible today. So I imagine we're gonna hit that point, and my speculation is beyond that, we are going to start entering like the new specialized hardware territory. If like I'm sure you have read like Ready Player One, they have these gloves which give you
Hmm.
haptic feedback, so you feel like you're touching things. Like at some point, they have these like full body suits, and you can feel like heat and pain and pressure. I think we are going to start moving in those kinds of directions, but I don't know what it will look like. I don't know if people would be willing to wear a suit just to go to virtual reality.
I I feel very similarly because there have been times where different people have attempted those things in different ways, and sometimes it just doesn't take off. Just people go, oh, I don't want to do that, and it's just flippancy. It's not, if it doesn't connect with people. It doesn't matter how great of an experience it could be. It's just kind of, how far are people willing to go? I even, the headset itself, like I use a Quest 2 right now. I find it very comfortable, but it did take me a little while to understand how to have it feel right. And then even now, if I have people over and they try it out, some people go, "Oh, I don't like how this. I don't have a thing on my head." And that's it. They're just not into it. And I maybe they could be persuaded over time, but that's the balancing of, well, lighter hardware. Does that have an impact on the capabilities of the system? And that's also why I think it's so interesting to see that VR games can be so visually, um, just not they're not pushing these state of the art graphics like PC games are sometimes. And I think it's really important that VR games can confidently lean into those sorts of graphic styles, because I would love a much lighter headset, even if it meant lower processing power. It What would matter more to me is feeling as free from the hardware as possible. And I've never played a VR game where I go, "Oh my god, the graphics were incredible." It's more the immersion. I mean, even like I keep saying, but Superhot's probably my favorite VR game, and it's there's barely anything to that game. It's almost a wireframe.
Yes, exactly. Just a bunch of red characters on a white background, and yet it's one of the most amazing games in VR. Um, and yeah, I agree with you. Like the barrier to entry is such a big thing. Like the magic of Quest is you can just grab it from the desk, put it on, and it works. Like within a few seconds, you are in VR, and it's working beautifully. Now, if you start adding more and more and more, and now you have to prepare for 10 minutes before you jump into VR, that's a big problem. I don't think people are gonna like that at all. Like, if anything, we want to move even into easier stuff, like no controllers. You just put it. It's like sunglasses. You just put it on, and it's there. Probably that should be the future then.
Yeah, I feel like I've used some of the there's hand tracking on some applications. I'm not super familiar with it, but I've used it a bit, and I go, oh well, this is it for me.
Yes.
If I could play all games with just hand tracking and the visor, I would. I don't know. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I see how there's a lot of hurdles there, but
But I was gonna ask, like, you don't miss the haptic feedback element to it.
it's case by case, I suppose. it really is case by case. I think that certain games, it does feel better to have something, and maybe even you would require something due to how, if there's inventory systems, there's menus you need to access. But if it's something where it's just like, even something like Swivel, I could play for sure. I could play with just hands, and I think I would have a lot of fun with it because it's a tactile thing of touching and moving and feeling, and you're not focused on very fine movements as much as big movements. So I don't know. It's so hard to say because it also, now I think about it more, I do see situations where it's like crucial to have the controller.
Yeah, or at least some sort of feedback, right? Like if you grab something, like if you imagine a tiny cube like this big in VR, like it's very odd to be touching that in VR and not feel anything in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, like controllers give you at least the haptic feedback and you get the feel like, oh, I'm holding this thing in my hand. But it feels to me like we can do better. Like I don't think we have found the final solution into how to balance like ease of use with also having this feedback element to it and like it feels more immersive.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if there even were some kind of haptic feedback glove that could simulate the weight or pressure you'd put on an object.
Yes. Yeah, I have seen some early experiments in that direction. It doesn't look like it's ready for mass consumption yet, or at least like it would be prohibitively expensive if you were to buy one today. But who knows? Like maybe with in a few years, like you start to see the cost dropping with mass adoption. It becomes like I don't know, $2.99 or something. That would be amazing. But
Well, that's most of the questions I had for you. I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on, the state of VR from your perspective and gaming and everything. But if there's anything else you'd like to share or like to say, open up to any comments you have.
no, like I really enjoyed this as well. Like it's of course it's a journey, and again we are a small team. We are starting to learn. I've been pretty excited about like what the future lies, like where the future is gonna be for Swivel. So it's amazing.
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot for chatting with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. And there will be links down below this where you can find Swivel for yourself. So give it a shot.